Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And as of the time we are recording this episode, E3 is coming to a close. So if you'll indulge us for a few minutes as we talk over a few highlights before we get into our main topic.
Yeah, I just wanted, there was a lot of exciting stuff going on, some less exciting stuff going on, and I thought it would be fun to talk about briefly. We're not going to give any hot takes because those have already been dished out at this point. I do want to point people to Movie Bob's episode, actually. He does the Game Overthinker about E3 and how they mostly only showed cutscenes and not a lot of gameplay and what the deal with that trend is, because that was really interesting. A thing that I would have thought to talk about, but he already did and did it way better than we probably would anyway. My number one exciting thing from E3, I have to say, is fairly shameless and obvious, and it's the announcement of Banjo-Kazooie in coming to Smash Brothers in the fall. Mostly just because also shortly after, because I follow him on social media, Grant Kirkhope posted that he made the music for the trailer, and of course he's making remastered music for the stage that we're getting, I think it's Mumbo's Mountain, or one of those kinds of stages, but he is doing the stage music as well. So nice. It's really awesome that the original composer of those games is involved in the Smash Brothers crossover.
No, that's a really nice thing. I mean, Nintendo was definitely my highlight.
Oh, yeah.
Dude, I mean, a lot of stuff. I didn't do a great job watching lots and lots of E3. I've kind of been picking up on like blow by blows after the fact and kind of rewatching things as I want to. And most of what I'm really excited about are things I was already excited about.
Sure.
I mean, Super Mario Maker 2 is coming out at the end of the month. I've definitely watched all of the days of gameplay they did with that. I'm very excited about it. Something that I noticed that was kind of interesting is the fact that with Sony not doing a conference, a demonstration, what have you, that it kind of became much more about game companies than about technological development.
Yes.
Because Nintendo, yes, has done their thing, but Nintendo is also a very strong first-party developer. Whereas, I mean, Sony and Microsoft have their in-house developers. It's a lot more of third party. And so when Nintendo's doing its own thing, it's like, okay, Nintendo's doing its own thing. And now we're hearing from Square Enix. And now we're hearing from Ubisoft. And now we're hearing from Devolver, which I had never watched the Devolver Digital Direct until this year. And Matt, have you watched them?
So I haven't watched the Direct. I have seen the announcements, though. But from what I recall, they're a lot more low-key and loose and kind of conversational, as I recall.
They absolutely are, and the Directs are very much a send-up of E3 presentations in general that also have their own timeline and, like, through line from their first one back in 2017. Like, all of the other ones have been sequels and continuations.
Neat.
It's ridiculous, and it's a really nice way if you feel like, okay, there's too many announcements, there's too much of the same things being said over and over again. Watch that. Don't eat while you're watching it. And also be prepared to laugh.
Yeah, I think, a lot of the other gaming podcasts that I listen to have mostly said that this looks like it might be the last E3, at least in its current incarnation, because of Sony's departure from it and, like, just the changes. One thing I will say is that, like, most of the conferences were between an hour and a half. And for the most part, all of those conferences that were that long, there were at least half-hour chunks where I was disinterested or distracted. Whereas Nintendo's Direct, which all of their Directs are about a tight 45 minutes, and they hit you with punch after punch of awesome things, there's not really a lot of time to be bored. Also, I want to go on record, I've already stated this on Twitter, the Doug Bowser coming to host the Direct gag is the ultimate dad joke, and I absolutely loved it. Don't at me. I thought it was amazing.
It's a very Nintendo thing.
Right. But yeah, I think that ultimately the long form conferences are going the way of the dodo. And like there were cool moments. Like, of course, it's hard to deny Keanu, the internet's infatuation with Keanu Reeves and the fact that he's in Cyberpunk 2077 and that he was so just delightful and awkward on stage. was a highlight, but the rest of that, like, that's what people remember from the Xbox conference, and most people don't even reference it was the Xbox conference. They're just talking about Keanu. Whereas,
I didn't know it was the Xbox conference. Dang.
See? But meanwhile, with Nintendo, like, their whole Direct, it was them, what they were doing, and they had a ton of third-party announcements on theirs. Stuff that up until days before I didn't even know were happening. Like, Square Enix is finally releasing Ni no Kuni on PC and on the Switch, and that game was made for the Switch. Like, I'm so excited that that's coming out. They're still going back and working with third-party developers to bring older games to the Switch so people can have them portable. Like, they made a major announcement that the same developer of Cyberpunk is releasing Witcher 3 on Switch, which is, Witcher was their big mainstay before they started working on Cyberpunk. And it's coming to the Switch, and that game's been out for a while. But Wild Hunt was a huge hit, and the fact that they're making it for the Switch and they're porting it to that system is a huge deal, both for the developer and for the Switch, because if you didn't have either of those major consoles and only play Nintendo systems and don't have a gaming PC, that's a really exciting announcement to go back and play it, especially considering it's such a good game.
Yeah, and it's also good for people who played the game when it first came out, and it's been a few years.
Sure.
And now they have a Switch, and it's sort of I did like that game. I'd like to go back and play it, and I can just take it anywhere. Cool. It's better than the usual, like, re-release kind of thing, because it's, as we've talked about ad nauseum, the Switch gives you a new paradigm.
Sure. Well, and also I think my other really, like, there were a ton of things about the conference that I loved, but I think the game I'm looking forward to the most is the remake of Link's Awakening. It's just the most adorable looking game I've ever seen. And it's also the first amiibo I've wanted before release, because the design, the fact that it looks like this weird cross between claymation and digitization, that the amiibo of Link from this new Link's Awakening looks identical to the character model in a way that none of the other amiibos do, and I want it. But the other thing I'm really excited about is I've talked at length on this podcast about how I fell in love with the Crash Bandicoot trilogy, playing it, the Toys for Bob remake or remaster or whatever we're calling it, on the Switch, and I held out for that because it took a little while. Toys for Bob said for months and months and months and months that Spyro Reignited is not coming to the Switch. It's not coming to PC. They're only making it for PlayStation, and I held off because the Spyro series is something I'd never played, and I knew if I could get it on the Switch, I would play the hell out of it. And lo and behold, in the montage of games during Switch's Direct, they announced the Reignite trilogy is coming out in September, and I kind of just felt justified in my waiting. I mean, I also didn't have time to play the Reignite trilogy, and so I was waiting anyway, but I was very excited to see it's coming Switch, because I love that these old school action platformers are getting new life on the Switch, because those are some of my favorite games, and it's very exciting to get to play them. At the end of the day, though, the game I'm definitely looking most forward to is definitely the Link's Awakening remake.
Yeah, I'm excited that the Spyro Reignite trilogy is coming out on Switch as well. I held off too. It's one that Sarah knows she will like Spyro when she plays it, but she will hold out for Switch, so I held out for Switch.
Right.
So so we can join in this vindicated feeling. And probably the one that I did not expect to feel so hyped up about after seeing the trailer was Final Fantasy VII Remake.
Yes.
I mean, it's one of those, like, in my brain, it's been whenever it comes out, I'm sure I'll get it. They announced a date. They dropped a big trailer. I'm hyped.
Yeah, I'm very excited about it. All of the feedback I've seen from trusted sources about the gameplay have been very positive. My trusted source, of course, is Megaran, who made an entire album about Final Fantasy VII. If there's a dude who I'm going to trust about, he was at E3, and he said that it was phenomenal. I'm excited to see how it works. My only hesitance is that the first 2 discs are only about Midgar. Like, I get that they want to tell a larger story that they couldn't tell in the original game. I totally understand that. And I know that there are going to be changes, and I'm okay with that too. I know things are going to be different. For the most part, I'm assuming characters who die will die, and characters who evolve a certain way will do that. But there are some minor there will be some minor changes.
Right.
But the scope of this game, I'm going to be really upset if I have to wait 10 years to play the whole game. You know,
That's fair.
I get it, and if I have to, I will. And, it's not really games as a service. It is just going to be like they are making complete games for each part, more or less. They said in an interview, without giving the length of time, that it is the length of a full-length game. You know, what does that mean? Is it 10 hours? Is it 20 hours? Is it 80 hours? Like,
I mean, it's a Square Enix game, and they have been making Final Fantasy for a while, so they probably have that in mind when they say that.
Sure. I'm worried that it's gonna be unsatisfying because it'll feel incomplete. I'm hoping not. I'm hoping that, like, while there will be a be continued mentality to it, that it'll feel complete for that section. You know, I'm worried that it's going to experience the same thing that The Hobbit did in the movies, where expanding it to 3 movies really watered down those movies, and I don't want that to happen with one of my favorite Final Fantasy games ever. That said, it looks beautiful. The combat looks awesome. The changes they made make sense. The graphics are amazing. Hearing the familiar voices from Advent Children reprising their roles was great. I'm a little worried about the Barrett problem. The fact that...
We all are.
Yeah, and like... Barrett sounded a certain way in the 90s because it was common, and I'm sure he was not written by people of color in the 90s.
Nor was translated by a person of color.
Right, and so like, the voice actor definitely sounded better in the current trailer we saw recently versus the previous one. Mm-hmm. But I'm still worried that they're like, it's going to be cliche black man speak, and I don't want that. It's uncomfortable, and I don't want to have to live with that for multiple games. So hopefully they'll fine-tune the voice acting, update it a bit. But beyond that, like, I have no other worries about it. It looks like it's going to be phenomenal.
Yeah, I'm not too worried about it being Midgar only because of what a chunk of the first game it was. And it also is a shift in priorities. Because in my brain, if it's like, all right, if you want me to make a speculation, and I want to, they can still make this 3 games, and they can divide it. The breaks are just a little different. Midgar is the whole, we're fighting Shinra, we're taking them down, we're saving the planet, and then at the end of Midgar, President Shinra is dead, and Sephiroth is back. So it's one of these like, oh, well, I guess we got to figure that out, and we better leave town. And in the main game of Final Fantasy VII, after you get out of Midgar, like, all the other cities are like one stop, off you go. And if the second part is the whole like, all right, Cloud, how do you know Sephiroth? We're tracking down Sephiroth all the way up to him summoning Meteor.
Yeah.
Like him actually getting and using the black materia, which is part of the way into Disc 2. And I mean, Disc 3 is just the final dungeon. And then the third game is, we need to get the huge materia. We need to stop Sephiroth. We need to, like, this. The second game is, we need to stop Sephiroth because some personal vendettas. Third game, we need to stop Sephiroth before he destroys the world.
Right.
So I remain stupidly optimistic.
I mean, and that's totally fair. I've been stupidly optimistic in the face of stuff for many different projects, and so I get that. I think again, it's something that's really close to my heart, so I want to see how it plays out. Like, the reason I have no hesitance to be excited about Link's Awakening is because, and this may come to a shock to a lot of people since I've played a lot of Zelda games, I've never played the original Link's Awakening. I've dabbled in the beginning moments of it, but I've never played it.
Oh, geez. Have you played the Oracle games?
So I have played the Oracle games.
Okay, cool. So you've at least experienced the glory of Game Boy Zelda.
I have. And
Good.
and I did buy Link's Awakening on my 3DS and never ended up getting around to playing it. I still have it and I could, but I feel like at this point I'd much rather just wait for the remake, because then I'll have no comparative knowledge. I can just enjoy this game for what it is. I will say the one big disappointment for me is probably the same disappointment everyone shares with the newest stuff coming out of E3, is the lackluster display of the new Avengers game. I don't, like, a lot of people are bitching about the character models and the voices aren't the movie stars. Like, I knew that stuff. And the fact that Troy Baker and Nolan North are just 2 of the many awesome voice actors on that project gives me
gonna be fine.
Right. Like, I have absolute faith in that. My hesitance is, we didn't really see any specific gameplay. Those who have talked about the gameplay they experienced felt as segmented as the trailer gameplay experience did. And the trailer did look lackluster. Like, it just didn't look interesting. That said, it's coming out next May. They have plenty of time, but it's games as a service. There's an online component. It's going to be in the vein of Destiny and those kinds of things. Anthem. The only difference is this one You won't have to pay extra for DLC or extra characters. All of that's included with the price tag, which is good.
Yeah.
But still, I don't have enough to go on. Like, I'm totally here for an original Avengers story. I love Spider-Man on PS4, and I want more high-quality superhero games to come out.
But we're getting Ultimate Alliance 3.
Right. And like, as far as diving into a Marvel story, that seems like it's going to be way more fun because it's gauntlet style hack and slash. The cutscenes will probably be cheesy, but that's what we expect.
That's what we want. Yeah.
Right. And like, this one looks hyper serious in the same way Spider-Man was, which I want, but they haven't, like, Square Enix did not impress me. The discussion about it didn't impress me. And it's a bummer because the voice cast looks awesome. I don't mind the design of the characters, though I feel like they need to tighten it up a bit.
And they have time.
Yeah, they do. And so I haven't written it off. Until I see more, I'm not psyched about it. You know, the thing I'm looking forward to next year right now is Final Fantasy VII Remake. Though the one thing I will say is we need a name for this that's not remake. Like, I get the companies are comfortable doing that, but like, just call it Final Fantasy VII The Return, or just call it Final Fantasy VII. The fact that it's called professionally Final Fantasy VII Remake kills me. It's just a stupid name.
Well, because they released a PS4 version of the original Final Fantasy VII based off the Steam version.
Yeah.
It's a whole thing.
I know. I really want it to have a cool name. But
me too.
It won't stop me from buying it, but I do want it to have a cool name.
I know. Rebirth of the Planet, Livestream, I don't know. But it's very telling that the games that you and I are most excited about are they're remakes, they're re-releases, they are second comings or third comings of games.
Yeah.
And one of the companies that I was very surprised had an E3 conference was Limited Run Games, which, for those who aren't familiar with Limited Run Games, they are a company that does small print runs of physical copies of games that typically do not have physical copies. So if it was digital only, like, all right, they'll make 3,000 physical copies for these systems of this game. I actually this morning ordered 2 games off of it. They were releasing Guacamelee on the PS Vita and Oddworld New and Tasty on the PS3. And I bought them. I'm very excited.
Yeah, Limited Run Games as a company is very interesting. I first heard of them with the excitement about the new Toe Jam and Earl, because they were releasing it on all the systems as physicals, and in fact also making a fake Genesis box version of it as well.
Right, yeah.
And like, I was like, oh, a company that just makes limited prints of physical copies of games that mostly only get digital releases, it makes perfect sense. Some people, especially collectors, love to have the box, the cartridge, the disc, whatever.
I'm one of them.
Right. And I am to a point. I have this bizarre logic. So hear me out briefly. With my Nintendo Switch, the games that I primarily buy digitally are ones that are only available digitally, or multiplayer games that I'm always going to want to have on my Switch on the go to play with other people. But most of the single player games I buy physical cards for, because I feel like once I've beaten it, I'm unlikely to go back to it given my availability of time right now.
Right.
And there have been minor exceptions, like there's a $7 game called Gato Roboto, which I highly recommend if you want a Metroidvania to like tide you over. That's only like 5 hours long, 3 hours long. It was phenomenal for what it was. And it's only like $7 or $6 on the digital store. Which was a totally single-player experience that I bought digitally. But for the most part, I try and buy them physically. And when I discovered Limited Run Games, I was like, oh, this actually seems like a really great idea. If I can wait for some of these games, this would be a great way to buy them.
Yeah, and there's of course some downsides to it. Some of it is waiting. I ordered my copy of Celeste for the Switch back in January, while we were at MagFest, in fact. Mm-hmm. I've yet to receive it. Part of that is because there was some DLC and additions that came out for the game that they went, okay, we'll put these on the cart too, so we're going to push this back. But that was the first limited run game I've ordered, so we'll see how long it takes Guacamelee and Oddworld to get here, and I'll have a better idea. I clearly still have some faith in them on that. But because of the limited print run, what will often happen is you'll run into like a Ticketmaster situation where these games get snatched up nigh instantly and then resold at a high premium on eBay or elsewhere. And I certainly bristle at that for all sorts of reasons. That's not their fault. But what's really interesting, and what I think kind of gets into what I'd really like to talk about today as the main meat of the episode, is the fact that at E3, they announced that they are working with several companies, most notably LucasArts, in re-releasing a lot of their back catalog. And not only releasing the back catalog, releasing them on their original systems. So whereas a game that had a digital release across several platforms, you're now giving them a physical release. Cool. Now they are taking games that several of them had physical releases, or the system is dead or in an aftermarket phase, and they are re-releasing them. They're releasing Star Wars for the NES and Game Boy. They're releasing Star Wars Episode 1 Racer for the N64. They're releasing Shadows of the Empire. They're releasing all of these games on their original hardware when you can already have them on hardware. It's a very interesting shift, and it kind of goes hand in hand with the recent trend, I mean recent as of the past few years, of mini classic consoles being released to the world, like the NES Classic, the SNES Classic, and then the Genesis Classic, and the now announced TurboGrafx 16 Classic, the Atari VCS Classic. And it's a sort of interesting world of how we go about getting our old games new again.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, so we did an episode a while back with our very good friend Case Aiken predicting what would be the next mini console. But we stuck to Nintendo because at the time, Nintendo was the only one to have released them.
And we had lots of opinions on it.
Right. And so we speculated that the N64 Mini would likely be the next one, though we toyed with the idea of a Game Boy Mini as well,
yes.
Which still makes way more sense to me personally because it would be portable. But like, I would have never predicted Genesis would have put out a mini physical console, only because they very recently released a new Sega Classics collection. They had one on PC and on the older consoles ages ago, but they recently just released a new one on the Switch. And so I was like, oh, this is 30 Genesis games. This is perfect. But they're still making it, and it's just fascinating to me. But the fact that we're getting all of these others also, and that like the Atari is going to be over $200, and it also has essentially the hardware for you to turn it into a mini computer and put whatever games you want on it, is very interesting because that's not leaning into what all of these other classic systems are, which are on the cheaper side, giving you exactly the greatest hits. I mean, the reason the PlayStation Classic failed was not because nobody wanted a PlayStation Classic. It's because the ports weren't made well. The exclusion of major games that people bought the system for really hurt it. And it was just the interface wasn't made well. Like, it was a rushed thing for last holiday that appeared rushed and people hated. Also, not including the dual stick controllers was a mistake, as you had games that would have benefited from it. It's in a similar vein that like the Genesis Classic is coming out, and while most of the games only need the 3-button controllers, they're putting Super Street Fighter and Eternal Champions on it, which are both 6-button controller games, and the 6-button controller is being released separately. And like, there was no reason to not include 6-button controllers, like, because any 3-button game can use a 6-button controller. It seemed like a lack of foresight. But it is interesting to watch these companies try and recapture their past. I mean, remember, when we were growing up, Sega was a hardware company. Like, the Genesis was the console. I had one. I'm pretty sure you had one. It's strange now, after them being a software company for so long and putting stuff out on all consoles pretty much, to watch them put out hardware again. It's very interesting to me.
It is.
And I don't know if it's good or bad at this point. I can't really tell. Like, I always worry when we try and recapture the past, only because, like, I've been fighting the urge to buy Final Fantasy VII, the original, for the third time, because I already have it on PlayStation and PC. But the idea of getting it portable on the Switch is like, this is what I've waited for.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's why I've bought Chrono Trigger 4 times, because twice it was portable. Like, it's just one of those things that I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing that we constantly re-release and remaster stuff. I guess ultimately it's good because new gamers can experience it.
Yes.
But I worry about how much money we're wasting on repurchasing the thing multiple times because it's not cross-platform.
And on the other hand, it is also good for game preservation.
Right.
But we're only preserving a select cutting of a console's library. And it's actually kind of funny to think about everybody talking about the Genesis Classic right now, because this is not the first Sega Genesis mini console. They released the Sega Flashback back in 2017, and it had like 40 games on it and 6-button controllers.
Huh, I forgot about that.
Everyone forgot about it. There was just a lot of other little hiccups and problems. I don't remember them all off the top of my head, but I remember it coming out and everyone going like, don't get it. Just don't. There's already other game collections and they do so many little things wrong. It's like, we thought with the NES Classic, yeah, this is perfect. How can you screw this up? Apparently you can screw this up. And then PlayStation kind of became the big, oh, we could really screw this up, because this was Sony throwing their hat in the ring.
Right.
But I agree that it's a little odd to figure out how many times we can buy a game. And I also accept that in getting classic consoles or getting these collections, there is going to be some overlap in your collection. That's just going to happen. If you don't buy something because it has one game in common with something you already have, you do you. I feel like you're missing out on stuff. I have an SNES Classic. I'm very fortunate that it was a gift, but I have several SNES games that in physical form already. But this way, I don't have to worry so much about getting a physical copy of Earthbound, or how much I'm going to have to pay for a physical copy of Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars. These things just are. And so with that in mind, one of the mini consoles that I'm actually the most excited about is the TurboGrafx 16, because that is a system I've never had. It's a system that if I wanted to start collecting for it, God no. There's a lot of hardware jiggery-pokery going on, as well as the fact that that's a whole nother system taking up a lot of space. Now, buying the mini is also going to take up space, but they've only announced 5 games for it, and one of them is already a game that I was considering getting a TurboGrafx 16 for. So if this means I finally get to experience the glory of this, Konami Nee Hudson console, so be it. They already have my money. There's going to be more games on it. Fantastic. Because really, a lot of TurboGrafx 16 games have come out on the Wii Virtual Console.
Right.
And elsewhere, but they've not really had a ton of exposure. So I feel like that is a console that is very deserving of this kind of a release. If we're talking on the preservation side, or on current gamers getting an old experience for the first time or for the 100th time.
Sure. I mean, a lot of this also for me stems from a fact that, like, I was someone who tried to be a collector for a while, and then I sold everything. And, like, so now I'm at a point where if I'm not playing something, for the most part, it's got to go. Like, because I have limited space. And so to that degree, there are certain games I'm not worried about rebuying. Like, they just announced shortly before E3 that they're remastering the Ghostbusters game that Harold Ramis worked on before he passed. The one that came out many years ago on the Xbox 360 and the PS3. And so that game I loved. I played it to death on my 360, which I recently got rid of. And they're remastering it for PS4, Xbox, PC, and the Switch. And so I will definitely buy that on the Switch to have it. Because I don't have it anymore, and I liked that game. And things like that, I think there's more logic in favor of me rebuying those games, because I assume I'm going to have my Switch for a while. Even if I don't have this physical Switch, I will have a version of it, since they're releasing a Pro and a Mini and whatever other nonsense they're working on. Also, like, I'm at this point, like, I didn't buy the PS4 Pro. I still have my regular PS4. It plays the newer games just fine, because they purposely are designing these games to be better on the PS4 Pro. But if you just have a regular PS4, it's fine. And I don't have a 4K TV, so it doesn't matter. But I'm always leery with next generation anything. And so when classic consoles are coming out and being re-released, it's the same kind of concern. And also, I'd rather have it all in one place. Like, the idea of buying the Sega Genesis Mini sounds great, but I'd much rather buy that Genesis collection on the Switch, because then I have it on the Switch. I don't need a separate system, a separate hookup. I can still take it with me, that kind of a thing.
Yeah, despite the Mini concept, it still takes up space.
Well, and also, like, we're getting a lot of collections now. Like, a Secret of Mana collection just came out with a previously unreleased North American game that's also getting the remake treatment, what they're calling now Trials of Mana. But we also recently had the Castlevania collection, the Contra collection just came out. And with these classic collections of old games, I'm realizing something very apparent. I sucked at video games when I was a kid, especially a lot of these certain games. Now, I will admit, with the Castlevania collection, I was hesitant to buy it. And then listener of the podcast, Scoop Joey, shout out to Joey, said that it has a save state mode. So you can literally save after every screen if you want. And that's helped. And I wasn't doing saving that frequently, but the save state allowed me to get further in Castlevania 1 and 3 than I ever have before, which was satisfying. But I still eventually hit a wall because the difficulty spikes. What I like about the later Castlevania games is that they're still difficult, but they're more about just practice, grinding, skill level, and learning than just hitting a difficulty wall. And like, they recently announced the Contra collection, which sounds great, except all of the Contra games that I loved, I played with Game Genie. I sucked at the base game. Like, they're so hard. And so I would never buy that collection, because what's the point? I'll never get past, unless there's like a mode that I can turn on unlimited lives and just blow through the game. Which
if they don't put in the Konami code, they're messing up.
Right. And that would be fine. But at the end of the day, what I loved about those games was not the difficulty. It was just the act of playing it, seeing the cool things. And I don't know that a lot of these old classic consoles consider that, and that's fine. There are gamers out there who are better at games than I am, and there will always be games on those classic consoles that I am good at or that I do like your Super Mario RPG, the original Sonic games, like games that I could beat without Game Genie. But I'm still hesitant to relive those glory days, because when I did it with Castlevania, I was like, oh, these games are fun. I also stink at them, which is not everybody else. But it's something that I've come to realize revisiting stuff from my past, is that, and I did say this now, like, Dark Souls is not a series for me because I'm not a player who wants to be challenged to the point of tears to then overcome it. I'm not saying that that's not a good kind of way to play games. It's just, it's not for me. The Dark Souls games were only fun playing them on PC and playing multiplayer with my friends, and the three of us taking on a boss together. And so, that kind of a thing. And so I worry about, with these re-releases of old stuff, that if I go out and buy them, I'm going to get easily bored because I'll hit a difficulty wall,
Right. And some of the collections that have come out have interesting, concessions to that idea.
Right.
The Disney Afternoon collection that came out a while ago, which is still on my PS4. I haven't deleted it. It has a special place. It's DuckTales 1 and 2, Chip 'n Dale's Rescue Rangers 1 and 2, Tailspin and Darkwing Duck. And some of those games can get very challenging, very tricky, but they have a rewind function. So you fall down that hole, hold down rewind as long as you want, attempt it again.
That's really nice.
You get a trophy for beating a game without using rewind, which I got, but that is the only penalization you get for rewinding. And there's a lot of that going on as well, which is nice. But yeah, no, it really is about what sort of experience you like or want to have. Some people enjoy the Dark Souls kind of challenge. I really like old Castlevania games. The first Castlevania, I absolutely love it. It has a very deliberate pace to it. And there's a lot of obstacles and challenges where it becomes a matter of like, okay, I just can't swing my whip super fast at this, or I can't run at this. Where does the pattern happen? Where does this go? I enjoy the pattern recognition of it. I'm not great at it, but I like it.
I mean, at the end of the day, I still enjoyed revisiting those Castlevania games. And until I got stuck, I was having fun.
That's fair.
I think a big thing about limited run games that seems fascinating to me is that first they started only releasing, as far as I could tell, new games that just didn't have physical releases. The fact that
Yes, that's true.
they're going back now and releasing old games is interesting, but there is a market for it.
Oh, yeah.
And I never really thought about that as someone who now doesn't really collect. But like, for example, I know that now Bloodstained is actually getting a mass release where it wasn't originally, and they were figuring it out, but it is going to have physical copies in stores. But
that's really cool.
Which is great. But that was a game I thought I was going to have to get on limited run because that was a game I wanted a physical copy.
That was why I paid into the Kickstarter. It was like, I don't care how long this takes. I'm going to want the physical copy. Fine. And I mean, limited run is not the only games in town. Off the top of my head, there's I Am 8-Bit that they don't do tons and tons of this. I mean, they also sell like apparel, vinyl records of soundtracks. They did the PS4 physical release of Res Infinite, which I didn't have a PS4 when that came out, and I deeply regret sitting on that. But whereas at limited run games, they are sold at retail value and these things sell out quickly, I Am 8-Bit a while ago released a Mega Man X and Mega Man 2 30th anniversary re-release. With a new box, they are on like special colored cartridges. The Mega Man X is on like this cool kind of snow white, and Mega Man 2 has the lighter blue of Mega Man's blues. And both of them, it's like 1 in 8 of them is actually a translucent glow in the dark blue. They made 8,500 of both. They are still available because they are being sold for $100.
Wow.
Yes. Now, one could argue about how much it would cost to get these games complete in box nowadays, but that's neither here nor there for this discussion. Those are still available. You can still get copies even though they came out last year, earlier. When was the 30th anniversary of Mega Man? Wasn't that 2017?
Something like that, I think.
Still available. $100. There it is. Maybe they have only 5 left, but it doesn't look like they're saying stock's almost gone. I do wonder and worry about what the complete in-box price for these LucasArts re-releases will be on old consoles, but I don't know, maybe they'll just be sold at $60. I feel like limited run games might do the negotiations where it's, okay, we can't overcharge on this. But that goes back to the discussion of value in games.
Right. I mean, there's also no library of gaming, like there's like
not yet
at least, but like there are games that have been lost to time or could be lost to time or just really incredibly hard to find because the professional outlets won't print them. And like the saga with Mother 3 and that, it was never released in the States for the longest time. And then they released, and Earthbound 1 never came out either, or Mother 1, I guess. And then they released it as Earthbound Beginnings on the Wii Virtual Console, things like that, where I wonder, like, it has been really interesting to see these collections and re-releases and reprints release games that were never previously released in the States. Like, I got to play Kid Dracula, which is a Game Boy game on
I'm so
Switch.
excited to get to play that.
It's fun, it's a cute little game. I suck at it like the rest of the old games, but I have fun playing it. It's a cute concept. It's this weird cross of like Mega Man and Castlevania because like he shoots fireballs. It's really interesting. But like it's fun to get access to stuff that we never even knew we didn't have access to because the internet wasn't as prolific as it is now.
And actually there is technically a sort of video game library out there. It's in Japan, of course, and it's just called the Game Preservation Society. From their website, it is a nonprofit organization formed by a group of volunteers who possess professional skills and knowledge in the preservation of games. So they attempt to get as complete of collections of games. A lot of what they're doing is the Japanese PC market, which had a huge heyday in the 80s and early 90s, that there was a lot of games that didn't make it out to America because they were, in fact, PC games. It's why we have NES versions of Metal Gear instead of the MSX.
Right.
And have the MSX. But they also will try to reconstruct. They'll make new boxes as close to the original as possible. Measure paperweight for instruction manuals and create as tight of a recreation of these as possible in a true museum preservation way. And there, of course, as you said, there are still games lost like this. And I don't know at what point I'm just going to burn everything behind me and just start doing this myself. But I think it's very important. And these sort of flashback consoles and release collections are an interesting stopgap in that idea. They are not a solution, but they are an interesting, like a homeopathic piece of the whole.
Sure. And I mean, it was only a matter of time till we got to this point, considering the fact that, makers are more common now than they've ever been. And people who can create both tech and physical media of any kind on their own is pretty prolific. I mean, once the CD burner got invented, it was that vein of technology only grew. And
right.
While, emulation is still catching up, and I think we're up to the PlayStation, Sega, Saturn era where they're starting to master being able to emulate those games, the idea of creating cartridges, is kind of a no-brainer because mostly it's about the circuit board. If you can make that, the casing is the easy part.
And some of it is also recreating the experiences. I think they have a lot of CRT sort of things going on at the Game Preservation Society.
Right.
It's context as well.
Well, right. And all of these collections for classic games have a CRT mode where you can play it like you're playing on a CRT TV, though I don't know why you'd want to because, that shit looked terrible. But, nostalgia and all that, I think it's a cute idea to kind of really give you the ability to relive the things that you grew up playing. And at the end of the day, we're going to have a tight bond to those games. But my biggest problem with these re-releases versus of physical copies versus, newer games is I barely have time to play the old games I love. I've talked about this many times in many places when talking about the fatigue of media. I used to play Chrono Trigger once a year. Every year I would play that game. I'd either do a new game plus or start from scratch. I haven't played Chrono Trigger in the last 3 or 4 years because there's so many new games that I feel like if I take the time to play an old game, I'm going to be missing out on the time to play new games. Now, that doesn't always hold true because for me, if the game's new for me, I can wrap my brain around it. Like I bought Final Fantasy IX, which I still haven't finished, but I'm making my way through slowly, and I am enjoying it. But that's part of the logic of why I haven't bought Final Fantasy VII again, why I haven't bought this Sega collection on the Switch, is because these old games I'm not really sitting with. I've had the online for the Switch since it started, and I've maybe played 10 minutes of the Kirby game, Kirby's Dream Land. I've played, a half hour of Super Mario Brothers 1, an hour of Super Mario Brothers 3.
Which comes back to that idea of when you have everything at once, which do you choose?
Right. And so I don't really play a lot of the classic games. And there's tons of stuff that have come out that I've never played, like Star Tropics and Lolo and The Adventures of Lolo and Lala. A lot of these games that look fun that I never played growing up that I want to play. But I just, it's making time. It doesn't help that I do 4 different podcasts, but that's besides the point.
That's on you.
That is on me. But it makes me hesitant about these re-releases to buy them because I'm like, when am I going to play them? Also, I don't have any of those classic consoles anymore.
Right.
So, buying physical releases of older games, the only old system I still have is my 3DS, which isn't that old, and my PS2, which by the scope of things isn't that old either.
It's technically retro.
It is technically retro, that is true. And I have a handful.
It came out 18 years ago.
And I kept that because it is backwards compatible completely with the PS1. And I have a ton of PS2 and PS1 games that I don't want to get rid of. That said, I still don't go back and play it that much. And I've had it for a while.
I will make an argument in favor of replaying or coming back to games you do love.
Right.
And that is, in a sense, they sort of prime the pump. Where when I bought the Castlevania collection, I bought it for the PS4. Not because I don't like the Switch, but also because they had the Castlevania Requiem collection on the PS4 and only the PS4. Right. And I do like that completionist aspect. If I can play so much Castlevania on this, so much. First game I booted up was Symphony of the Night. I have Symphony of the Night. I've beaten Symphony of the Night so many times. You know what? It got me so excited for playing the other Castlevania games that I immediately started with the first one. And whereas it would have been like, I don't know, maybe we'll get to it, maybe whatever. I played something that I knew I loved. I was just like, you know what? I do love Castlevania games. Why don't I just get started? And there is something to be said for that. It's one of the reasons why it's great to have and know your favorites. Because playing Chrono Trigger will get you excited about other Square games, about Final Fantasy, new and old. It's nice to have. Like, you can't do it all the time in tons and tons of games, but there is something to be said for that.
Yeah, and I think it's also like the rationale that I think I can get behind is different for Final Fantasy VII, which at this point everyone knows, spoiler alert, I'll eventually buy the Switch. Like, that's a game that I know so intimately, as we talked about in our strategy guide episode, that if I stop playing it, like if I start playing it on the Switch and then I stop playing it for 6 months, when I pick it up, I'll be able to figure out where I am or what I was doing. Whereas in more modern games that I don't know, like unless I stop in a specific place, I completely forget what I'm working on and most of the time abandon the game. Like, I saw the announcement of a new ukulele game that's going to be 2.5D. Like, it's going to be mostly a side scroller that's going to have some 3D moments, which looks like it'll be a lot more fun to control because the 3D controls on the original was what I had the most problem with. But B, like, I like the characters and I like the cutesy nature, so I'm excited to play that. So when I saw that trailer, I was like, oh, let me go back and finally finish the original. And I booted it up. I zoned into the ice world, which is where I guess I had stopped playing last. I could check how many pages I had and how much stuff I'd collected, but I had no idea what quests I'd completed, where I need to go next, what I was still working on. And like, I tried to figure it out, and after a half hour of not being able to figure out where I had to go next, I was like, I guess I'm not playing this. Because at that point, I need to start over or do a heavy amount of Google searching to figure out maybe where I'm at. And that bums me out. I guess I wish more games had a mechanism that made it easy to figure out where you left off.
Certainly in the longer games. This idea of like, every game needs to be an 80-hour open world everything. When you make that much demand of people's time, it's sort of like, there's too many streaming services now. We're not buying all of them. There's too many open world games. We're not buying all of them. There's, it's nice that there are a lot of indie games that are coming out now that are like Gato Roboto, that are 3-4 hours, 6 hours, and you get the complete experience, and it is a very worthwhile experience. And then you can go, I did it. And if you ever want to go back to it, you just start it up again, and it's no big deal.
Yeah. And like, that's part of me being a completionist myself. Like, I like finishing things. There's a sense of satisfaction.
Agreed.
And I think it's one of the things why I didn't think I liked Final Fantasy IX originally, is because I would get like an hour in and then get bored. And I think that was mostly because I was playing the original version. And like, while there are a lot of games, old games that I like to go back to, I feel like 8-bit has aged and 16-bit has aged better than old polygons, because at least, 8-bit and 16-bit, 32-bit stuff, those games have an aesthetic that we still mimic to this day. Nobody on purpose is making shitty polygon games. And I think it's because we thought they were better, but I would be inclined to say they're not.
They were a necessary step.
Sure. And one thing that's great about the remasters of the Final Fantasy games is that they've polished up the backgrounds and the models. So even though they are still kind of chunky, they're not pixelated anymore. And so they're easier to look at. It's still more fun to play that way. And that's all I needed to get through Final Fantasy IX, is I needed the aesthetics to just be tweaked a bit so I can go, oh, this is actually pretty to look at again.
I mean, looking at the remaster or the remake or whatever for Final Fantasy VIII that's coming out, I'm very excited. And it does kind of look beautiful.
It does. I still won't play it. I'm sorry. At me, nerds, if you must. But I hate 8. I hated it. I thought it was not a good game. I thought the story was interesting. And I mean, that said, it does. The remaster does look pretty. And because the story is good and all of the remasters have had gimmicks in them, if you just want to see the story, it might be worth it for that. Mm-hmm. But
I'm playing it. I'm getting it. I'm excited.
I mean, and you're not alone. I've talked to tons of folks who are really excited about that remaster. And that's fine. I mean, again, there are tons of people who hate 7. They think it's too predictable, and to each their own. I think that what has been smart by Square Enix is that in these refreshers on old games is they're adding mechanics like boosting yourself to level 999, turning off random battles, and all these other things. So if you want to make progression in a faster way to just see the story or to get a glimpse of the game or to get past certain difficult things, you don't have to hit the wall. And yes, some people might argue, then what's the point if there's no challenge?
But it gives you the option of playing how you want to play.
Right. And at the end of the day, gaming is a lot more than just challenge. There are tons of gamers who just like stories, and you could argue they could just watch something. But the idea is video games have an interactivity, even if there isn't difficulty. If you're driven by challenge, then that's great. But there are tons of gamers who aren't, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yes, you are interacting with the story in a way that reading a book, watching a movie, going to live theater isn't. This is its own way of enjoying and interacting with the story.
Yeah. At the end of the day, I think it's great that companies like Limited Run exist and that we are getting remasters and re-releases of games. And this is not the first and probably won't be the last time we talk about remasters and remakes, as they seem to be more and more prolific as we continue forward. Because
should we just remaster one of our old episodes and release it then?
Right? Yeah.
We'll just make it sound even better.
Fun and Games Classic.
Fun and Games Classic. Or we'll say exactly the same things, but we'll record it in a nicer room.
Right, exactly. It's one of those things that I think it's fun to relive our past. I think it's fun to re-engage with these older games. And like, as much as I complain about it sometimes, they've already announced that they're re-releasing the remaster of Devil May Cry 1 on the Switch at some point, which I will buy, even though I already have it on PC and PlayStation 2. Because I love Devil May Cry. And so, like, we're all hypocrites when it comes to our favorite things anyway.
And when it's released several times, some people will find it for the first time on one thing, and some people just need to buy all of it.
Well, and you can bet your ass that if Limited Run does a physical release of the Nintendo Switch version of Devil May Cry, I would buy it.
God, yes.
So, at the end of the day, it comes down to what the value is to you. It's less about what the value is to the industry, although that's important to speculate. At the end of the day, when you're the consumer and we live in a capitalist society, whether we like it or not, it's what you're willing to spend and what the value is to you.
Yeah. And we'd like to know what you value, listeners.
Nice.
Thank you.
Segue.
Thank you. I'm very proud of that one.
Smooth as silk. Please let us know what you think about the remaster remake world. If you've bought anything from Limited Run Games, what games have you bought and why? Or any other reproducer of classic and current games that don't have physical releases, because I'm interested to hear what people buy and why. I'm always curious what gets you to spend your money at the end of the day, because I found that no two gamers are alike, and while like me and Geoff have a ton of overlap, there are tons of games that one of us likes that the other doesn't, because we all have diverging paths based on our pasts. So let us know what you think. Also, your E3 takes, if you still remember how you felt 2 weeks ago. Let us know what you thought, what you were excited about that was announced, the kinds of things that are coming out that you're really looking forward to, besides Final Fantasy VII, which everyone's looking forward to.
On some level or another, if only for it to come out so that we can stop talking about it.
Yeah. Always, as always, we love hearing from all y'all. Go to certainpov.com, which is where you can find our podcast as well as any other podcast platform. If you have a moment, please rate and review us on iTunes or Facebook. It really helps us to get featured. We want to grow this conversation and bring new listeners into the fold. If you have ideas for topics or suggestions of things you want us to talk about or know our opinions on, please send us an email, funandgamespod@gmail.com. We would love to do a mailbag episode at some point. We've gotten a few emails here and there, and we would love to do a full episode just on requests from the listeners. So please let us know.
Absolutely. This is so much of a conversation. Thank you for keeping it going. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm Matt A.K. Stormageddon.
And happy gaming.